Hello Misfits and welcome. In today's video, we are talking all about how to deal with last minute cancellations. We have all been there. I think it's actually impossible to be a dungeon master and not have had to deal with some sort of last minute cancellation. It doesn't matter how close you are to the people playing at your table, somebody is going to have to back out at the last minute for some sort of reason, and you need to know how to deal with that. So that's exactly what we're getting into today, so let's jump into it. Before we go any further, I want to talk to you about Sci-Fire. Sci-Fire is the sister company to Books Please, and they are dedicated to offering people an extensive collection of books from a variety of genres. They have sci-fi books, fantasy books, gaming books, and much, much more. They have graciously asked me to become an affiliate of their company, meaning that if you use the code MISFIT at checkout, you can get 5% off your purchase. And using this code also helps me out, which is pretty nice. On top of this discount, Sci-Fire is also trying to get you the best deals on books possible. If you look through their website, almost every single book is listed at a lower price than what you might find on competing sites, so it's definitely worth checking out. I've looked through their catalog of books. I definitely got myself the Call of Cthulhu Keeper's Handbook, or Keeper's Rulebook, because I'm very interested in that. I've also been looking a lot at Delta Green, which is like Call of Cthulhu, but a modern setting, and I did spy that they had a few Delta Green books on their website as well, so I will definitely be checking those out. But they have a variety of systems here, from Dungeons & Dragons to Pathfinder to Starfinder and much, much more, so it's worth taking a look at. So don't forget to go check out Sci-Fire and be sure to use that code MISFIT at checkout. Alright, so when we're dealing with last-minute cancellations, first we need to kind of figure out how we're handling our player absences in general. This should be something that you guys discuss as a table during session 0. And there are a couple of different ways that people like to handle this. So option 1 for player absences is that the character that they play as just sort of goes away for the session or sessions that they're gone, and you just deal with the people that are present at your table, and when that player comes back, you find a way to work them back into the story. This works fine. There are definitely some pros and cons to that. We'll get into that in a second. Option 2 is the character is still there, even though the player is gone, and during combat, they're just sort of handled by one of the other players at the table, or possibly you yourself as the DM, but when we get into role-playing stuff, they sort of take a back seat. There are also some pros and cons to this option as well. So let's get into the pros and cons of these two different takes. So option 1, the character leaves. The good thing about this is you no longer have to worry about them in like role-playing settings. You don't have to figure out how to keep that character included despite the fact that their player is gone. You don't have to fool with any of that. That's a big pro. The major con to that, though, is you're probably gonna have to rebalance stuff. So any sort of combat encounters you had planned that were balanced for a specific number of party members, that doesn't work anymore. So you're definitely gonna have to revisit any sort of combat and make sure that they work out with the new adjusted party number. Another con to this is story-wise, it might be difficult to find a way to write that character out of the story briefly or even for an extended period of time. If they are, sailing across the ocean and have been encountering all these random, monsters and other pirates and stuff along the way, you might have trouble finding a way for them to just not be on the boat anymore, Or if you are wandering through the desert, you might have trouble explaining why they disappear or how they disappear while you're wandering through the desert. There are a lot of ways in which story-wise this would be difficult. And this is actually the reason why I don't use this in my table and in my games, just because look, there's enough story I'm dealing with. I don't want to have to worry about writing in characters and writing out characters every week. You know what I mean? Let's talk about the other method. The character stays even though the player is gone. So the major pros to this is you don't have to worry about writing them out of the story temporarily. You also don't have to worry about rebalancing any encounters. So that is definitely a big plus. There are definitely some cons to this, though, as well. So the characters are still there during all your roleplay moments, but because the player isn't there to roleplay as them, they kind of take a back seat, and that can get kind of awkward. If you had anything sort of designed for that specific character, that's not really going to work anymore because they're not there to play as them, so you might have to re-finagle some of those roleplay moments. Also, that character is being handled by either you or the other players during combat. And if you're handling it, that's one more thing on your plate that you don't need. And if the players are handling it, then there's a good chance that they might get something wrong. So if you're going to use this tactic, I think you definitely should establish some ground rules up front. That's what my table does. So for these situations where the player is absent and somebody else is playing as their character, my rule is that characters don't die if their players aren't there. They go down and are out of the combat, but they're stable. No death saves or anything. But they could still lose items, they could still get captured, stuff like that can still happen. And then another thing is it's the responsibility of the players to communicate any sort of specifics on how they want their character played. So we don't really do any like do-overs or anything like that, you know? What happens is what happens, and it's the responsibility is on the player to make sure they're communicating what they need to. This has worked out well for us, but I mean, nothing is perfect. There's always going to be frustrations when players are gone and you're trying to figure out how to keep the story moving forward for everybody else at the table. Which I guess is important to at least point out or talk about. Should you keep the game going when one of your players is absent? In my personal opinion, absolutely. Because the more you cancel the game, the less like drive and momentum the story has. If you keep canceling the game because people have conflicts and have to cancel, then they're going to start forgetting about the story. They're going to be less interested in getting back into the swing of things and seeing how things continue. They'll forget. If you keep it going, if you keep the story going, regardless of whether they're there or not, then they're probably going to get some FOMO, fear of missing out, and they're going to be desperate to start coming back to the game and making sure that they're there for everything that's happening instead of hearing it from everybody else. Alright, so after we've established all of that, let's look at the different things you need to do in the event of a last-minute cancellation. And some of these are going to fluctuate depending on that first one, how you handle player absences. So, first things first, we need to look at combat. I guess you don't have to do it in this order, but I always go to combat because I'm not as good at doing combat on the fly, so I need the prep. So let's look at the combat encounters. If suddenly you have characters missing, or if you know they're going to be played by people that aren't used to playing as those characters, you might need to adjust that encounter. You might need to lessen the number of monsters, or tweak HP, or things like that. Regardless, you're probably going to need to be watching this combat encounter pretty closely and be ready to make some on-the-fly adaptations. If you see that they are really, really struggling and it's because they're missing a person, maybe give them a little bit of grace and maybe tick off some of that monster's health or something like that. Just keep all of that in mind. I know some tables aren't into that, you know, they're like, well, too bad, the player was gone, that's the consequences. And it's like, all right, well, there are still people that are here, so maybe don't punish them because somebody happened to not be there. If you don't know off the top of your head how you might need to adjust the combat to suit whatever party makeup you're dealing with in that moment, pop on over to Kobold Fight Club, plug in your monsters, or at least monsters of the same CR rating as what you had prepared, and just sort of figure out if it's going to be balanced or work out or not. I know that I have definitely critiqued the sort of combat and like encounter building process in D&D. However, it's okay in a pinch. It will at least get you the ballpark that you need. Alright, number 3, shifting the spotlight. So sometimes when we are preparing for sessions and working on our campaign, we know that there are going to be moments like RP role-playing moments where different characters are going to get thrust into the spotlight. You know, there's going to be a certain area of information that really ties into a character's backstory, and so the NPCs are going to be talking to them more than some of the other party members, or maybe we're going to the hometown of this other character, and so they're going to get pushed to the forefront of the story. There are lots of different ways in which we might, decide that a character gets a moment to shine and get to, show off what they know and what's special about them. This is what makes player absences really complicated, because what if you prepared something for that character and they're not there? What do? This is legitimately the toughest part, in my opinion. Because sometimes we can do stuff on the fly and make changes on the fly, and sometimes we put a lot of prep into stuff and now it doesn't work. So first things first, if it's a really big, important role-playing moment and that character or that player is not there, I think you should try to move that to a different session. See if there's a way to delay that story element or that plot point until they come back to the table, if possible. If that's not an option at all, then you need to either shift that over to the next best person, the person closest to fitting that role, or you need to maybe make an adjustment to what the reveal is or what the moment is so that it better suits somebody who is there. This is a very nuanced thing, and that's why I think if you're talking about like a big story moment, it's best to just push that back to a later session when the player is back. If it's like a small thing like, oh, an NPC is looking for a little bit of help in studying a magic scroll, but the wizard is gone, then maybe we shift that over to asking, the druid in the party about that instead, or the cleric in the party about that instead. Somebody that maybe could fill that void and answer those questions and have some of that knowledge, even if they aren't best suited for that. That's where it works best. If it's the really big moments and this is a last minute cancellation, I don't know if you're going to be able to really, change things too much in the amount of time that you've been given. So keep that in mind. Number 4, let's think about the skill checks and skill challenges that you've prepared in this session. Are they going to work for the party makeup that you've got? If you design some skill checks to, sort of highlight the abilities of different characters, and one of those characters is gone, you might consider changing that skill check. It's pretty easy to do this on the fly, Instead of having some sort of trap where you use dexterity to avoid it, but your rogue is gone, then maybe you need to shift that over to something where you use athletics to avoid the trap, or something like that. Or maybe there was a clue and you would normally use perception to reveal that, but now we need to move that on to investigation. I don't know. Something like that. Just shift some of these skill checks and challenges so that they better suit who is at the table, so that there's not obviously this hole or this gap that's needing to be filled by the person that's gone. And if you need ideas for completely new skill checks and challenges, you could check out the Game Master's book of traps and puzzles. Really, really interesting. Some of these are like legitimate big puzzles that you've got to work out, and some of them are like riddles that need solving, or, more simple traps that don't necessarily take a ton of prep to do. So this is a super useful resource. Number 5, consider throwing in some random tables. So if you had some really character-specific stuff prepared and that character's not there, and you want to move that stuff to a later session when they are there, you might want to fill in this now sort of empty session with something, and random tables are a good solution for that. I normally hate random tables. I don't like using them during my campaign. I feel like they can be really frustrating. They don't always add to whatever story I'm trying to tell. But when you're just trying to fill up a session so that you're giving your characters something to do so that they can have fun and play the game despite people being gone, it's a really nice, easy solution. And random tables don't always have to be like encounter-based stuff. They don't always have to be combat. You're not always rolling up how many monsters are going to randomly show up in the middle of the night. Sometimes there are random tables that are, you know, more interaction or like social RP encounter stuff. Or sometimes you've got tables that are big like group skill checks. The encounter tables, or the random tables that I use the most, are actually in the Ghosts of Saltmarsh campaign module. I use a lot of the like travel at sea tables to determine if they encounter like hazards and stuff. And sometimes this is like, you know, they get swept up in a storm and they have to do all these checks to try and get through the storm. Sometimes it's like there's a contagion on board, or there's a fire on board and they have to, you know, find different ways to deal with that issue. And then sometimes, these are legitimately my favorite, they roll up a crew conflict encounter. So parts of the crew start arguing, and so then it's up to me to sort of improvise what that conflict might be. And this is a great way to sort of take something that's random and find a way to like give it a more story-driven purpose and tie it into, you know, the campaign overall, and, you know, how different characters are interacting with each other and feeling based off of what's happened to them and stuff. So random tables, they can fill up time, and they don't have to be as like, I don't know, random or meaningless as you might think. There are ways to tie that in and make it feel more important and impactful. And if you need other suggestions for random tables, then check out the Game Master's book of Random Encounters. Lots of different random tables and stuff in here. At the very least, it can be good for inspiration, but also really good in a pinch if you suddenly have, you know, this big chunk of your session that you're gonna have to like revamp because somebody's gone. Number 6, and this would be a hard one, but doable. Instead of continuing on with your campaign that you've been running, you could just run a one-shot instead. If you do this, then I would recommend checking out the One Shot Wonders book. It's full of all different one-shots, and like, they're all pretty quick and easy. It sort of just gives you kind of like the overview of like, you know, what the problem is that needs solving, gives you some key locations, some secrets and clues, and, you know, some stuff that you can win, or some quick stats for some different monsters you might encounter. It's pretty easy going, but to be completely honest, last minute having to throw together a one-shot, not the most fun. It's definitely a lot of work on your part as a dungeon master. I've done it before. There was one time where a bunch of my table were going to be out, and so I decided to, you know, last minute prep a one shot, and I let them just use some of their characters from another game that we had played, and we threw it together, and it was like a murder mystery. I think I got that one off DM's Guild, and that worked, but like, I literally stayed up so late trying to throw that together at the last minute, and it worked, but yeah, it's just, that's a lot. So number 6, like, you could run a one-shot instead if you don't feel like you can continue in your campaign, but you want to still play, you could do that. Just be prepared for, you know, putting in a little bit of extra effort. Yeah, so these are all the different things you might need to think about and account for when you're dealing with some last-minute cancellations. If you have never DM'd before, I can tell you right now, you're gonna have to figure out how to handle last-minute cancellations. It's gonna happen. There is no way to avoid it, ever. But fortunately, you know, with practice and time, it's not so bad. And last-minute cancellations, though they really suck and just hurt, honestly, up front, the more prepared you are, the less you feel that sting of getting canceled on. So definitely work on having a game plan and sort of like set up some like, I don't know, some parameters or like tips and tools that you're going to rely on in the event that happens. Almost like doomsday prepping for like canceling on your dungeon master. You know, that kind of situation, I feel like almost. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please feel free to like and subscribe. That definitely helps me out, but more importantly, leave a comment down below. Tell me about like the worst last minute cancellation you've had to deal with. Tell me about some things you've done to sort of work around a sudden cancellation. Tell me stories about that, because the engagement on this video is what really helps other people see it and help other people find this channel. So be sure to do that. But with all of that said and done, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and I will see you again next time. One of the absolute worst, moments of cancellation for me was in my first campaign. This was before we started playing every single week, and it's like the main reason why we do play every week now. But back in the day, if somebody was out and I tried to keep the game going, I would play as whoever was missing. So, if a couple people were out, I would just run their character for whatever combat encounters happened, because it was really hard for me to find logical ways for their characters to dip out for a session, and I didn't have the time to rebalance the encounters and stuff. But there was a session where we had so many players that were out that I made up more of the party than the party. Like, I was like 4 different people, and then there were only like 2 other real players there. It was ridiculous. So ever since that, I was like, all right, I'm not playing as your characters when you're not here. You guys, whoever is still here, you guys are gonna handle who is absent, because that's too much for me. I can't be like 4 players and like 7 monsters and be narrating the story and all of that stuff. It was just too much. But there was just a moment where I was just sitting there at the table and I'm like, wait a second, this is stupid. So yeah, I've definitely been on the rough side of player cancellations. It's unavoidable. But you learn some tricks of the trade, and I don't know if I could say that it like gets better. It always sucks, but you get better, which makes the whole situation just not as dire as it maybe felt the first few times it happened. Anyway, have a good day, guys.